there's good news for America, it's less than a year away. It's less than a year away. I tell you, America, help is on the way. History repeats itself. And oh, it's going to repeat itself big next November. Mr. Speaker, while the Democrats' action on our economy, such as anti-work welfare programs and massive, unneeded stimulus, has left Americans worse off, it's their inaction along the southern border that has left our country less safe. You see, Mr. Speaker, it wasn't just Americans left behind in Afghanistan. It was billions of dollars of our military equipment. Mr. Speaker, do you realize that the Taliban has more Black Hawk helicopters than 2/3 of the NATO countries? More than Australia? Mr. Speaker, do you realize when Bagram shut down and 5,000 of some of the worst human beings escaped? Mr. Speaker, do you realize by the Biden administration of opening up our border, more than 160 countries of people have come across that border? Mr. Speaker, they don't have to wear a mask or be fined. They don't even have to be tested. The government actually pays them for a trip somewhere in America. Mr. Speaker, I'll wait till we're in order.
Gentlemen will suspend. Gentleman's recognized.
I appreciate you, Mr. Speaker. Inaction on the southern border. Mr. Speaker, almost every single Republican on this side of the aisle has been to visit the border, almost more than once. Mr. Speaker, I heard the president, who's been in office more than 40 years, say he drove by El Paso one time. But Mr. Speaker, when we went to the border earlier this year, after one-party rule in Washington that changed by executive order, I can wait, Mr. Speaker. They can finish their conversation. You can finish. No, you can finish. Don't lower your mask, you'll get fined. You're going to get fined. I'm just warning you.
Gentlemen will suspend.
Mr. Speaker, I know you hold the gavel, but I heard from your side of the aisle telling me when to speak, where to look, and what to do, and interrupted me many times. I've heard your speaker talk about a higher standard. I'm waiting to see it, Mr. Speaker. Are you going to laugh too, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, I know your side of the aisle has no problem removing people from committee. I wonder if people keep talking, they should be removed from the floor. When we traveled to the border in February, we watched something we've never seen before. We sat and we interviewed a new facility that just was built, and it's built in the capacity that it would never be filled. It hit the record that day. And we interviewed the families and asked how long they've been on the road. They said ever since President Biden told us to come. Ever since President Biden told us to come. As we sat with those brave men and women of our border protection, we watched what they had to do, the job they were doing day in and day out, the conditions, when COVID was rampant and nobody being tested. And we went up along the line against the wall. This is important, Mr. Speaker. I think people should listen. And I'll show you the point why. As we talked to the border agents, they told us they'd seen something they've never seen before, where people would rush the wall. So everybody would go there, then they'd come the other way of the cartel, bringing fentanyl across. They said they'd never seen anything like it. And I asked them, I listened to the vice president.
Gentleman's recognized.
One-party rule, 1 year. As I sat and talked to the border agents, they told me of the border cities that had to close their schools because the cartels coming through and shooting. Of the ranchers who are having their houses burned or their grandchildren kidnapped. Then they said something so shocking, I had to ask them twice. You see, I heard the vice president say, this is just Central America problem. I said, is that really what's happening? No, they told me people were coming from 160 countries. They said they just caught people on the terrorist watch list. I came down. We did a press conference. In the press conference, I mentioned that we had caught people on the terrorist watch list from Yemen. You remember the USS Cole? The American Navy ship that was bombed? Or maybe you need to refresh a memory of real recently. You know, a U.S. embassy that was overtaken? No, I'm not talking back in Iran in '79. I'm talking about the comparison to today. As that I said that to the American public. I respect all of you. You come here because you want to legislate. I expect you would be shocked too. That you'd probably call me up. What can we do? You want to protect your constituents? I know you do. But Mr. Speaker, there was a member of the Democratic Party on the Intel Committee, tweeted, said I was lying. Said he gets the same intel as I do because I'm on the Gang of Eight. Interesting, when I put the facts out, I don't know, maybe the mail's slow. I've never once heard him apologize. Or worse yet, I've never once heard him say, how can we stop it? How can we stop it? I didn't even see an amendment added to this bill. Think about that for one moment for the American public. You are spending more money than we spent to end World War II. You're hiring 87,000 IRS agents. Not one Border Patrol agent. Not one new dollar. You're providing money for amnesty. You're providing money, $450,000, for people who came here illegally. And you're taking it from American hardworking taxpayers. But you do nothing to stop those on the terrorist watch list from coming across this border. Nothing. There has been nearly 1.7 illegal border encounters at the southern border since President Joe Biden became president. And our border czar, Vice President Kamala Harris, still has no plan to support our Border Patrol. Now let's put this in perspective. There has been more illegal border crossing between the months of February and October under Joe Biden than in 2018, 2019, and 2020 combined. So when somebody asks me, what does it mean if you have one-party rule for 1 year? You get more illegal crossings simply from February to October than you did in 2018, 2019, and 2020, all combined. What do you think is going to happen after the billions of dollars you spend in this bill providing amnesty? That number will look small to you. But I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, some people say, let's wait and see what the CBO says. So when the CBO comes back and tells you, you got millions more, it's okay, we'll still vote. Let that sink in. What's the Biden administration reaction? They're now considering paying illegal immigrants $450,000 per family. An action that President Biden admits would incentivize more people to come over illegally. Mr. Speaker, when we tell our children's children about this night, we'll tell them that's where their future went. When they ask us why do they pay such high taxes, we'll remind them about this night. Because we built up our bureaucracy. Mr. Speaker, you're actually celebrating this bill. You're actually celebrating this bill. That's more than some of the 9/11 victims received. Can you think about that? How do you explain, Mr. Speaker, as my friend Steny Hoyer said so proudly, mentioned today for our children's children, how do we explain that those that were killed on that fateful day of 9/11 received less than those who came across illegal? It's okay, I'll be here a long time.
House will be in order.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry if it...
Gentlemen will suspend. Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I've got to apologize to you. I think I'm upsetting people on the other side of the aisle when I tell them what's in the bill. They just yelled at me that they're leaving. I apologize. Mr. Speaker, nobody on this side of the aisle wrote this bill. I thought that was going to be different, Mr. Speaker, because I took President Biden at his word. I took him at his word when he said he was going to get COVID under control. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, more Americans have died this year than last year under COVID. Mr. Speaker, the $450,000, that's more than some of the 9/11 victims received. It's more than the next of kin receives in insurance of those 13 Gold Star families that got killed by a suicide bomber who was in the prison of Bagram. Mr. Speaker, I watched in disbelief as President Biden said he'd do nothing different. I watched in disbelief, Mr. Speaker, when he had a press conference and he told Americans it was safe to come to the airport. In less than 30 minutes, you were on that conference call too, Mr. Speaker, with the Secretary of State, Joint Chiefs said no, it wasn't safe to come to the airport. Mr. Speaker, there are many people that have served this nation, served in the armed services, and on both sides of this aisle. I have never watched members work so hard to get the American hostages out of Afghanistan to only be shut down by our own State Department. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you of a personal story. Mr. Speaker, I picked up the phone one morning when this first started, and I called the regular number to the White House. And I said, I'd like to talk to the President about what's happening in Afghanistan. White House recently called, wanted to know if it was really me. To the President's credit, he called me back. I said, Mr. President, I know you're trying to hold this deadline for the Taliban, but what about our allies? What about those from the UK and France who fought side by side, not because their country was attacked, but because we were attacked? He told me he wasn't going to budge. I said, Mr. President, there are thousands of Americans that are held there that can't get out. He said, Kevin, no, the number is much smaller. I said, Mr. President, what is the number then? Oh, it's just smaller. I've watched the President look America in the eye and tell us he would not leave till every American's out. What do you say to those Americans that are still stuck there? The last time we felt like this, Jimmy Carter was president. Mr. Speaker, what does it say to those Gold Star families? Mr. Speaker, I had one in my office, a father who had his daughter, who wasn't even supposed to be there but volunteered. She was an electrician. Just days before, you see photos of her holding a young child. She told her sister, I'm going out in front of the wall because you can't believe it. Someone needs to be there for them. She wasn't supposed to be out in front of that wall. When that suicide bomber that was locked up in Bagram, that never should have got out, that we never should have shut down, killed 13 of the finest Americans we know. You know what this bill does? Nothing for them. It gives more money to an illegal person who crossed this border. I'm sorry. Americans expect more. Our priorities should be different. These people risk their life every day for us. Just let that sink in to your children's children. One-party rule for 1 year has brought us inflation we haven't seen in 31 years. Gas prices the highest it's been since the last time President Biden was down at the White House. A Thanksgiving that's going to cost you more at any time in your life. A border where 1.7 million encounters. A border between February and October that more people have crossed than 2018, 2019, and 2020 combined. And Mr. Speaker, the closest the President has ever been to the border in 42 years is to drive through El Paso. Mr. Speaker, a Vice President who is the czar of the border. This isn't a Republican or Democrat issue. This is the safety of this nation. What do you think's going to happen to that border when you provide $1 billion in amnesty? What do you think's going to happen when you reward people with $450,000? Where do you get the money? From the hardworking taxpayers of America who have less to give. But you know what? They're going to have to give more because you're hiring 87,000 IRS agents to come after them. 1.2 million more audits. And half of all those 1.2 are going after Americans who make $75,000 or less. That's what you base this entire bill on. That's what you waited for the CBO to tell you. How much money can we get from them? How is that possible? The payments for illegal immigrants is just the latest data point in a much larger trend of failures on this border. Cheered on by left-wing activists, President Biden and Vice President Harris have presided over the greatest series of border security blunders in American history. Mr. Speaker, if 160 different countries have had people come across that border illegally, if we have caught people on the terrorist watch list, if a suicide bomber got out of Bagram and in 1 week killed 13 American soldiers, do you think they know how to get into America? Do you think they know where to go? Maybe they have to go at night. They got a better chance now because they've got night goggles that we had. They got Black Hawk helicopters. They have more Black Hawk helicopters, the Taliban, than 2/3 of our NATO countries. They have more than Australia. In that phone call with the president, you know what he told me? Oh, Kevin, we're going to have a lot of leverage with the Taliban because they're going to need help running their country. Why don't you tell that to the hundreds of Americans that are still there trying to get out? And every time there's a member on this side of the aisle that goes upon themselves because they care about their constituents and they try to get that American out, the State Department attacks them. You try to criticize them, they risk their own life. And Mr. Speaker, even in our own hearings, I respect greatly anyone who served in uniform, and you have some tremendous members on the other side of the aisle have. And I watched them question the Secretary of State and still not get an answer. Mr. Speaker, to that member on your side of the aisle that sits on Intel, that said I wasn't telling the truth, that we were catching people on the terrorist watch list, that has done nothing about it since. I wonder if he should serve on Intel next term. Because America needs to be protected. For anyone who thinks they're not a border city, just look up how many deaths you have in fentanyl. And let me tell you where fentanyl comes from. It comes across that border, but it comes from China. Mr. Speaker, let me tell you another story. I have a friend who serves in the Senate. Right before COVID, he was on a Codell with other senators. And he was sitting and having a communication, maybe you've experienced this as well, with a military general in the Chinese Communist Army. You know what that general said to him? America, you're weak. You're weak, America. You're weak because you believe in God and you take fentanyl. Fentanyl has increased 300% only because the border is not secure. There is no city in America that is safe. This is deadly. They've handed the border over to the cartels, unleashing these monsters onto our people. And they compromised our national security. Answer me this question, Mr. Speaker. If somebody's on the terrorist watch list, and Mr. Speaker, they entered our state of California. They haven't entered one. They weren't together. They came on different days. And you know right now, if you're a member of Congress and you ask them how many more you got, they don't want to tell you. Just as they don't want to give us the number of how many Americans are still stuck there. They're hoping if we don't pay attention anymore, we'll forget. I promise you this, we will not forget. And we will not stop. Here is what the National Border Patrol Council President Brandon Judd told us, and I quote, "This administration says it's just Central American countries. But in just 1 week in Yuma, Arizona sector, we've seen people illegally enter from countries like Egypt, Russia, Armenia, Georgia, Haiti, Portugal, and Uzbekistan. There's no better time for them to come into our country than now." I didn't think Egypt or Russia was in Central America. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to offer this invitation. We got Thanksgiving coming. We're both from California. Why don't we invite the Vice President to come down to the border with you and I both, and let's take a tour. And while we're there, let's go to the Port of LA and Long Beach and talk about the supply chain. Let them see that these ships that are waiting and coming in, when they unload, they go back empty to pick up more from China. They don't load American products. Now, it may take a little while to get from the border of San Diego up to Long Beach, so we may have to stop to get gas. I'll split it with you because I know it's not cheap. But I'm willing to make that offer. These patrol members along the border, they bear the brunt of dangerous policies. While the Democrats act like there's nothing going on, Texas Mayor Don McLaughlin told us, Mr. Speaker, just a few months ago, nearby cities are expected to see an inflow of migrants much larger than the size of the towns themselves. He said, and I quote, "We're not equipped in our area to handle this. Our resources are strapped as it is because of the pandemic." The mayor said his own town will try to quarantine COVID-positive migrants in hotels. But when they come back to check on them or bring them food, some of the migrants are gone. You know, that's just not here. You know, when we departed Afghanistan, a lot of people got on that were never searched or gone through any process. We put them on military bases in America. Some just depart. Some people have already been arrested for crimes they created. When we heard from our constituents that were stuck in Afghanistan, who said they went to the airport because they watched the president tell them, and the Taliban grabbed their papers, tear them up and shoot at them. Or they're hiding in the halfway houses, and the State Department denying, just letting them get across the border so they can get out. Aside from the health risks, these circumstances create physical risks for innocent bystanders. There are not enough officers or agents to handle the intake and regular patrol, so the issues are spilling onto the streets. Now, I'm sure in your committees, Mr. Speaker, as you went through this bill, as you knew you were going to spend more than at any time in American history, because the Chief of Staff to the White House, and many times, Mr. Speaker, people refer to him as the Prime Minister, he said this is twice as big in real dollars as the New Deal. You must have thought somewhere when you saw these statistics, it's okay, we've got so much money, let's put some and help those border agents. I'm sure somebody raised that issue, did they not? It must have been voted down because it's not in the bill. But whoever raised their hand and said, let's spend $1 billion to give people amnesty, that made it in. The only thing I question, Mr. Speaker, why did you stop there? Because there's going to be billions more coming. You were able to do in one-party rule in 1 year, just between February and October, more than everybody's been able to do in the 18, 19, and 20 combined. Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if that's what you talk about, building bigger bureaucracies, but this bill does it. Mayor McLaughlin said they have about 2 to 3 car chases a week back in 2019, then none for a few weeks. Now it's every single day. Roughly 10 to 12 high-speed car chases per week. He says, and I quote, "It's escalating. We've had houses broken into. We had to put our schools on lockdown because they're armed out in town near these schools. When that happens, then we have to pull all the officers out on manhunts." How would you like to represent a city that every single day, roughly 10 to 12 high-speed car chases? I remember on the news when there was one, the whole nation would watch. They don't even put them on because they're every day. But where are they running by? And it's not a car chase, just a cop chasing them. It's a cartel with weaponry. They're going by schools. In America, in American schools, they have to shut down because you opened the border. You do nothing to protect it in this bill. You only incentivize more people to come. Did you put any money in here for car chases? Did you put any money in here for the schools? I hope you put money in here for drug treatment. Because, Mr. Speaker, there's sure a lot of fentanyl coming across that border. He told us recently that just last spring, they had to put schools on lockdown 48 times. Think about that. Your child goes to a school, just in spring, 48 times they're on lockdown. You think your child feels safe? You think your child's learning? What do you think those parents are going to think when they hear about this bill? I don't think they could just leave the chambers. I think they'll probably want to come to a school board meeting. Maybe the FBI will investigate them for terrorism because they care about their children's safety. One-party rule in 1 year has brought America to this. Our children's education and lives are being interrupted nearly 50 times in just a few months. That's in America. When personnel and resources are pulled from one area to another along our border community, it leaves families like Russell Johnson's in danger. You see, Russell lives on a ranch with his family in New Mexico, just miles from the border. I'm proud of my family. My family immigrated from Ireland and Italy. They worked on a railroad, and they became a cattle rancher. It was a tough life. My grandfather got married, lived with his brother on the ranch, but the ranch didn't make enough to pay for both. So he went back to working on the railroad. To make money as a rancher, they never had to worry about a cartel. They just had to worry if it rained enough or if the cattle price was high enough. Russell Johnson, it's remote, and it gets little service where he lives, making it a prime place to illegally enter the country. This is what Russell told us. With the way things are right now, we don't let our kids play outside by themselves. They can't play outside by themselves. This isn't Chicago. This is on a cattle ranch. There's no telling who they might encounter while they're out there. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to invite Russell Johnson to come to D.C. And I want to invite anybody on the other side of the aisle that votes for this bill. And I would ask you to take his questions. I would ask that you point out in this bill, where does it protect his children? As an American, I don't think he'll argue that you're going to cost him more. You see, the interesting thing is, I'm okay paying taxes if they go to something. Richie Neal says it's going to build a bigger bureaucracy. Not along the border, it's not. It's tearing down walls. Schools are closing. You know, for the first time in the country, Mr. Speaker, this generation doesn't believe they'll be better off than the generation before them. And this bill almost guarantees it. They're guaranteed they're going to have to pay more and get less. I'll be sure and let you all know of that date. You're celebrating the bill. Celebrate with Russell and tell him where he's better off. Just think for a moment that in America, children can't play outside on their own property for fear of their safety from cartels and traffickers. I'm not talking about the cities where you defunded the police. I'm talking about remote cattle ranches. In a place I think every American dreams they could retire one day, on a ranch. Build back. You're going all the way back to the Westerns, I guess. People have to fend for themselves. I can't believe that's America. I don't accept it. I know we're better than that. I know some of you are mad at me, think I spoke too long. But I've had enough. America has had enough. Not only do communities at the border deserve protection, the selfless men and women of our Border Patrol deserve more support to do their jobs. I don't know if you've been down to tour with them. If any of you are going, you want to make it bipartisan, I'll go. I know a lot of people on this side of the aisle will go with you. Because we think it's an American problem, that we want to solve it together. But when someone comes across the border, and you have the children, it's interesting, Mr. Speaker, when it became one party with 1 year, you changed the definition. They're no longer cages. Still the same place. But it's the border agents who have to go off the border and inside to care for them. So the border's less secure. And now you're providing more money for them to come, less agents there, and it's just a spiraling effect. You know, between inflation, gas prices, the border, crime, there's a common denominator. One-party rule in Washington for 1 year. U.S. Border Patrol members from the Southwest Division of the border alone saved 4,920 lives in 2019, 5,071 lives in FY20, 12,833 lives in 21, and 836 in 22 so far. Why don't we pass a bill to honor our Border Patrol agents? Why don't we bring them here to Washington? Better yet, why don't we go to them? It's our job to secure the border. You're spending trillions of dollars. You know what you're spending money on? Not to build the wall. You're taking taxpayer money, on material they already have there and paying them not to build it. So Russell Johnson's children can't play. That's what you're taking taxpayers' money for. That's why you're hiring more IRS agents to audit more Americans to get more at them, because you don't trust that they're honest. There's not a day that doesn't go by. Just this week, of a 5-year-old child all by himself. You know, one of the trips down the border, I was talking to this Border Patrol agent, and I was asking her about her job. You could tell the stress that she has felt. To work under these conditions, the threat of the cartel, the crime coming across, the families, the children. And she told a story of 3 young children she saw out in the distance. The oldest was 5, the next was 3, and the other was 11 months. I said, where was the parent? There was no parent. Well, what crowd was she with? No, they were all alone. If she had not found them, they would not have lived. So let this sink in. You're encouraging more of them to come. People don't make it all the time. People are raped. Human trafficking happens because they don't have the money to pay the cartel. Then when they come to America, they have to work to keep paying them. You're incentivizing that. And while you incentivize that, you make Americans unsafe. I don't know, Mr. Speaker, it's something that the just administration does in the cabinet or everywhere when they're asked a question. I know what the Secretary of Energy did when she asked about how to lower prices. She just laughed. But I remember, Mr. Speaker, when Vice President Kamala Harris was asked about the border. She has a very definite laugh. You know what her answer was? Well, I haven't been to Europe either. Well, she could go to Europe because people from Europe are coming across that border too. She'd go to Russia, Egypt, Yemen. She'd go around the world. Now, speaking of safety and security, these hardworking Americans being ignored by Democrat politicians. Let's talk about law enforcement.